She was just an elderly woman who took in those in need of care, a landlady who many entrusted with their well-being. She provided them with a place to stay, but it would cost more than anyone was prepared to pay. Dorothea Puente was the landlady of a boarding home that would turn into a murder house. Sacramento social workers would sometimes turn to Dorothea Puente when it came to seemingly hopeless clients who were denied lodging by other boarding houses. From people disposed of by society who were at the brink of instability, to those who were simply growing old with no one to care for them, Puente would open her door and welcome them into the boarding house she ran from her home. And because no one else cared to look after them, they'd also not be easily missed, making them a perfect fit for Puente's murderous scheme. As innocent as Puente may have appeared, her past was stained with run-ins with the law. Found guilty of forging checks, she became a convicted felon at the age of 19. Later, in 1960, she received jail time serving 90 days in Sacramento County Jail for residing in a house of ill fame and received 90 days for suspected vagrancy. There was even an instance in her criminal past where she was found drugging and stealing from the elderly. In February of 1988, Puente, then 59 years old, found herself welcoming a new member to her boarding home, 52-year-old Alvaro Bert Montoya. Montoya was placed under Dorothea's care by an outreach counselor named Jody Moyes. In October of 1988, Moyes learned that the client she'd referred to Puente was no longer living at the boarding house. This piqued Moyes' curiosity, leading her to question Puente on Montoya's whereabouts. When asked, the landlady claimed, first he went to Mexico, and then that he had gone to Utah. Puente's ambiguous response would only raise more questions than answered, furthering Moyes' suspicion. Granted, Montoya had a transitory history. His absence may not have been questioned by others. But for one reason or another, Moyes found something unsettling about Montoya's alleged move. She wanted the truth. By November 7th, Judy Moyes filed a missing persons report in search of Alvaro Bert Montoya. That morning, Puente and one of her tenants, John Sharp, are visited by an officer who interviewed the two in regards to Montoya's alleged disappearance. After confirming Puente's story in her presence, Sharp found an opportune moment to slip a note to the officer. The handwritten note read, "She's making me lie for her." Montoya's case would reach the desk of Detective John Cabrera, who later visited Puente along with another officer, Terry Brown, and a federal probation agent, Jim Wilson. Puente permitted the three to search the home where nothing suspicious turned up. Cabrera then asked to dig up the backyard. Puente obliged without a fuss, and even lent an extra shovel to the three, short of one. Puente watched as the shovel sunk into the earth. Slowly, the holes grew deeper, and finally, Wilson's shovel struck something in the ground. Wilson proceeded to remove the excess dirt, discovering what appeared to be a tree root upon first inspection. At this point, the shovel was not much use in extracting the object, so Cabrera climbed into the hole to better engage in its removal. As the objects loosened, it would be clear that this was no tree root at all, but instead, a human leg bone. Cabrera took Puente down to the station to further question her about the discovery, but Puente remained calm and insisted she had not killed anyone. Unable to crack her to confess, Cabrera allowed Puente to return home that evening with a patrolman who stood guard outside her home throughout the night. The next morning, a host of officers and forensic personnel were dispatched to Puente's residence, where a more thorough investigation began. A frenzy of onlookers and neighbors supposedly caused Puente to feel on edge. She asked the detective, "Am I under arrest?" Which at the time, there was insufficient evidence to detain her. So the detective replied, "No." Puente then asked to be excused by explaining that the growing curiosity outside her home was making her anxious and that she wanted to go for a cup of coffee nearby to ease her tension. She was granted permission by Cabrera's superior. Cabrera escorted Puente and one of her tenants through a mob of people cluttered outside her home. He even watched to make sure that she went where she said she was going, before heading back to continue digging. But sly as a fox, Puente managed to slip on by, and eventually onto a bus, headed to Southern California. Not long after, Cabrera would exhume the remains of a second body on Puente's property. And this time, he had what he needed to arrest her, but unbeknownst to him, Puente was already long gone. Over the next few days, the investigation would unearth 5 more bodies from the backyard, one of which was that of Alvaro Bert Montoya. Puente had been on the run for 4 days. She was hiding in a motel room in Los Angeles under the name Donna Johansson. The fugitive decided to visit a local bar. There, she met a retiree named Charles Wilgus, to whom she introduced herself as Donna Johansson. The pair kept each other company for a while. They chatted, drank, and even made plans for the following day. Puente's choice of conversation oddly included social security benefits, sharing Thanksgiving dinner, and a surprising proposition to live together. Apart from her very forward suggestions, Charles felt this peculiar stranger was somehow familiar, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. As the two finally went their separate ways, Charles returned home where the fog surrounding the face he'd spent his afternoon with eventually dissipated. Just hours after they parted, Charles began to wonder if perhaps the woman he spent his afternoon with was the landlady from Sacramento the police were after. He turned on the 5 o'clock news, waiting for a photo to confirm his hunch. But when they did not show a photo, he phoned the news station and asked if someone could provide him with a photo of the wanted woman. Gene Silver, an assignment editor for KCBS, arrived at Charles's apartment with Puente's photo in hand. He quickly realized that the woman he was with earlier was indeed no Donna Johansson, but rather the fugitive, Dorothea Puente. Silver tipped off police with Charles's claims, and later that night, police went down to the Royal Viking Motel, to room 31, where Dorothea Puente identified herself as such, and surrendered without a fight. That same night, Sacramento police escorted her back up north via charter jet, accompanied by news personnel. While en route, a brief interview was conducted where she told a television reporter, "I have not killed anyone. The checks I cashed, yes. I used to be a very good person, at one time." In 1993, Puente stood trial for 9 counts of murder without testifying. 2 of the counts were bodies found outside of the home, but still linked to Puente. During her trial, Puente's lawyers claimed that she neglected to report the death of one of her tenants to authorities because running a boarding house was in violation of her parole. While admitting to cashing the checks, they also claimed that many of her victims died of natural causes and that Puente never killed anyone. After a 5-month trial, 11 of 12 jurors believed Puente was guilty of murdering 7 of her boarders, whose bodies were discovered in her yard. But one juror was not so easily convinced. It would take 24 days of deliberation before all 12 jurors could come to an agreement. In the end, Puente was convicted of 3 killings and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. On March 27, 2011, the convicted serial killer would die of natural causes in prison at the age of 82. A seemingly harmless woman, hiding behind a gentle, grandmotherly face, who helped those in need was instead a deceptive serial killer. Turns out, the little old lady next door was nothing as she'd seemed.